Plows into a crowd in Toronto, Canada, killing 9 people, injuring more than a dozen. A suspect has been captured by police tonight. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Police are still looking for a motive behind this deadly attack. Dan Bongino and Mark Stein with us in just a moment. But first we go to reporter Jeff Harrington, live for us tonight in Toronto. Jeff?
Okay, so Tucker, the suspect at this point has been identified as 25-year-old Alec Manassian. He is from Richmond Hill, Ontario. That is just north of Toronto. His LinkedIn account says that he is a student at a college here in Toronto. But Tucker, let's talk about that confrontation with police. When police caught up to the alleged suspect, Alec Manassian, it appeared that Manassian may have had a gun pointed at police or a cell phone. That's the other report going around. But of course, it will take some time to get that confirmation. And Tucker, he was even shouting things as "shoot me, kill me." So that will certainly now be part of the investigation as to whether there may have been mental health issues at play here. The Canadian government says at this point that 25-year-old Alec Manassian is not associated with any terrorist group. And so as such, there is no national threat here tonight in Toronto and Canada, Tucker.
Jeff, thanks a lot for that. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent and an NYPD officer, and he joins us tonight. Dan, you just heard that the government of Canada saying there is no connection, no obvious connection to a jihadi group, and therefore there's no national threat. How do you assess that?
Well, you know, you never know, Tucker, because you don't know how many of these statements are political and how many of them are based on investigative leads. I mean, it's sad that we even have to think like that.
Right.
But when it comes to incidents like this, there's a reluctance, and I understand. I get it that maybe you don't want to get people,
thing
right.
is increasing. So why are we not treating that like a crisis?
Yeah, we should. And you're right. The intent, I think, from this case is clearly there, regardless. Let's separate two things, Tucker. Intent and motive. Motive's still up in the air. Maybe mental health, maybe terrorism, maybe neither. We don't know that yet. But the intent is clearly there. And two things jump out to me just from the publicly available reporting. Number one of the witnesses at the scene said he hit, quote, every single thing. Now, obviously, if your contact points are people on the curb and you manage to hit just about every single one of them, clearly there's some evidence of intent there. Secondly, there's no evidence there of any screeching brakes, any effort to slow down whatsoever. So we clearly know that there was an intent to harm. And you're right. I mean, this is a big deal. We've seen an uptick in the use of vehicles to kill people in these horrible attacks. And again, being cryptic in the law enforcement arena, I just don't think helps in this new social media era.
So, I mean, attacks using vehicles have been increasing in frequency around the world. And I wonder if there comes a point where even the people in charge of our country admit that limiting access to the weapon, in this case a vehicle, isn't really a rational response. At some point you have to talk about why are people doing these things. Do you think this will spur that conversation finally?
Well, Tucker, I hope so. We have focused way too long on a kind of a fireman approach. In other words, putting out these fires afterwards with ridiculous measures that law-abiding people don't care about. Whether it's, I mean, it's not a gun control. I totally understand that, but we've seen it in the gun control arena as well. You have to focus on more of an arsonist approach. In other words, we should be starting investigatory fires here. We should be doing better control at our borders. We should be generating better surveillance capabilities on some of these people. We should develop a better warning system for mental health problems. And instead, you see these kind of, after-the-fact approaches, and they're just absurd. You've seen it, like I said, in the gun control debate over and over.
Right. It's mindless cable news chatter, focusing on the weapon to the exclusion of the motive. Dan, thank you very much. Great to see you, as always.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Well, as you heard, there's still a lot to assess in the wake of this attack. We don't know the motive for what happened in Toronto, but we don't need to in order to draw larger conclusions, some of them ominous. People didn't used to drive vehicles into crowds. They didn't used to shoot up schools either. Easy availability of weapons did not cause what happened today or what's been happening in this country for years. Fewer people drive than used to. Fewer families have guns at home. That is not the point, no matter what they tell you. The point is that more people want to hurt strangers than ever before for some reason. The bonds that hold society together are obviously fraying. Why is that? You'd think our leaders would be thinking hard about this question, since it's the only question that matters, and staying up late trying to come up with a solution, since that's their job. But they're not doing that. Instead, they're obsessing over trivia, fake Russian collusion, transgender bathrooms, fill in the blanks. They're creating diversions. At the same time, they're seizing the moment, using tragedies like this to strip the rest of us of our rights that our ancestors died for. Some wacko murders innocents. Okay, you're no longer allowed to defend yourself in your own home. That's the lesson we're drawing there. ISIS is recruiting on the internet? Great. A perfect pretext to shut down Twitter accounts we disagree with or demonetize your YouTube channel. Instead of fighting extremism, which is in abundance, the left uses the existence of extremism to shut down legitimate dissent and self-defense. In other words, for the crimes of a few, all of us suffer. Meanwhile, the people in charge become more powerful. That's the scariest part, and maybe the whole point. Author and columnist Mark Steyn joins us tonight to break down what exactly is going on. So at some point, do you think the conversation becomes, why would someone want to kill strangers? Why are an increasing number of people wanting to kill strangers? Why aren't we having that conversation?
Because I think the people who run not only Canada, but the entire Western world now, don't want to admit that they no longer have control of the situation.
Yeah.
This part of Toronto, which happens to be my hometown, I was in this neighborhood a couple of weeks ago for a bar mitzvah. All the streets have English names. The school is named after Field Marshal Lord Haig, who commanded British forces during the Great War. They've got streets called Princess and Empress, and there's one named after Lord Byng, who was Governor General of Canada. You can't find anybody with names like that in that neighborhood now. It's become largely Chinese, Korean, there's some Iranians, there's Moroccan Jews. And in this case, it's somebody with an Armenian name. And if you look on a society as just like one big stamp collection, and it's nice to have one of everything, then the modern Western city is a great place. But in these multicultural hot pots, grievances develop, regardless of whether it's a global phenomenon like jihad or whether it's just peculiar mental health issues. And then you have a situation where the jihad guys have got a lot of mileage out of taking trucks, driving them up on the sidewalks, killing large numbers of people. You can't reasonably expect that just to be confined to Muslim jihadists. Sooner or later, some guy like this guy with an Armenian name, and Armenia is like 99.99% Christian, apart from a few Yazidis and Kurds. I think there's like about, last time I was there, I think there were 600 Muslims in the whole joint. But you can't expect, when people see that a car can kill large numbers of people, you can't expect people to say, oh, well, yeah, but that's just a Muslim weapon. That's for the jihad. So eventually, other people start renting cars and driving them up on sidewalks.
So, but if you were running a society, and benefiting from it disproportionately, as our leaders do, wouldn't you spend a little bit of time thinking about how to hold it together? What makes a cohesive, successful society, a society that will, for example, wage a war on its own behalf with a foreign adversary? Like, why wouldn't you think about that? I don't get the sense anybody thinks about that at all.
No, they actually don't. They think in opposite terms. In Canada particularly, you saw last year, in fact, for the Dominion of Canada's 150th birthday, Justin Trudeau celebrated it by awarding $10 million to a jihadist he'd had sprung from Gitmo, who killed an American over in Afghanistan. In other words, multiculturalism lets you decide which side of the war you want to be on, whether you want to be on the home team or the away team. That's how good multiculturalism is. You talked about how they use these incidents to take away our rights.
Yes.
In a certain sense, Tucker, it's actually more it's more basic than that even. I mean, setting the rights to one side, I notice now when you're in London, when you're in Berlin, when you're in Brussels, when you're in Paris, and now presumably when you're in Toronto, they're trying to put bollards over every strip of raised pavement so that cars can't get up onto the sidewalk to kill people. So the price we pay, in effect, for not having bollards around the national border is we've now got to ugly up all our cities and have bollards around around everything in sight. On the New York bike path, for example, everywhere you go around any western city now, they're looking uglier and uglier because our leaders have, in a sense, established ugliness as the organizing principle of the multicultural city in the 21st century.
That's right. This is what happens when you put security consultants in charge of hardening the target rather than having enlightened leaders think deeply about what it means to have a happy, cohesive society. But none of them care.
I'd like us to soften the target, and that involves thinking about these issues in a bigger picture sense, not just bollards around everything in sight.
That's exactly right. Mark Stein, thank you. That was deep and interesting. Mark will be back.
Tucker.
Back to react to Kanye West's endorsement of Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams. One of those interesting developments in the news that nobody could have predicted. Plus, a college professor in Nebraska using her free time and her state-subsidized salary to harass the children of an NRA employee. Why should you and me and every other taxpayer in this country be forced to fund her lifestyle, a job from which she can never be fired? That story and many other questions next.